She's just a young Apache girl on the run from her pursuers, but an unbearable burden rests on her fragile shoulders. Unscrupulous bounty hunters, driven by greed and legend, will stop at nothing to seize her family's heirloom. But who could have known that an ordinary farmer named John Dawson would become her only hope and the guardian of an ancient secret? Watch until the end to find out how an incredible twist of fate and a newfound family help the heroes defeat evil. At the end of the story, you will find a conclusion that will shock you and teach you wisdom. Subscribe to not miss the continuation. 1880, Arizona Territory. The air was dry and dusty, like an old bone. The sun was mercilessly beating down on the scorched earth, and every step on the cracked soil was a crunch, as if someone's hopes were breaking. In this lonely, God-forsaken place lived John Dawson, a farmer who was older than his land. He was over 60. And for the past 10 years, he'd been trying to wring some kind of crop out of this rocky hell. Wrinkles, deep as canyons, furrowed his face, and his hands, hard and calloused, like the roots of an old oak tree, were a testament to his eternal struggle with nature. John was a man of few words, accustomed to solitude and silence, broken only by the creak of the old windmill and the bleating of 2 or 3 sheep. Every evening, he would walk around his property, checking the buildings. This time, as he approached the barn, he noticed that the door he had locked was ajar. John took his old Colt revolver, covered in patina, from his belt and cautiously pushed the heavy wooden door. It was dark and stuffy inside. He inhaled the smell of hay, dust, and something else. Something strange that made his heart clench. It was the smell of smoke and blood. Something clenched in John's chest. He had seen Apaches. A few years ago, they had passed through these lands, and rumors of their cruelty were everywhere. John knew that by law, he should report this to the sheriff, but, looking into her eyes large, frightened, filled with unbearable pain and fear, he felt no hatred, only compassion. He saw not a savage, but a hunted animal looking for salvation. The girl flinched sharply when she saw the weapon in his hand. John slowly lowered the revolver. He did not want to harm her. He motioned with his hand to his feet so that she would see that he was not going to attack. He slowly held out a bottle of water to her. She looked at him with suspicion, but thirst took over. She took the bottle with trembling hands, greedily put it to her lips, and drank all the water in one gulp. Then she turned away again, trying to hide in the shadows, as if that could protect her from the trouble that was pursuing her. John carefully put the revolver away and left the barn, leaving her some food and clean rags so she could bandage her wound. He sat on the porch, his arms crossed over his chest.
I ask you to like and subscribe to the channel, so you will help me in motivation to make such great stories for you, and I will see that you like them. Enjoy watching, everyone.
And looked at the starry sky. His thoughts were in turmoil. He didn't know why she was here, where she came from, or why she was so frightened. He felt that there was some big intrigue behind this. His solitary life, which had seemed so simple and predictable, was suddenly filled with uncertainty. He knew he was doing something dangerous, but he couldn't do otherwise. Something in his old, tormented heart responded to her pain. The next morning, as the sun began to heat the air again, he returned to the barn. The girl was still there, and her wound was bandaged with his rags. She still looked at him with suspicion, but her gaze was not so wild anymore. She was thin, emaciated, and John thought she probably hadn't eaten for several days. He brought her fresh bread and dried meat. She took the food but didn't eat. She looked at him, and John knew he had to do something. He squatted down, pointed to himself, then to her, and said, "John." Then he pointed to her, waiting for an answer. She, clenching her lips, uttered only one word, which sounded like a sigh of wind. Sao. So their story began. Sao lived in his barn like a shadow. She came out only at night to get water and occasionally wash in a small stream. John didn't force her to talk. He just left food and water, and he worked on his farm. He didn't know what was chasing her, but he saw her fear in her every movement. One night, waking up to the sound of a dog barking, he saw silhouetted riders in the distance, heading towards him. He quickly grabbed his rifle and lay down behind the barn. He saw them stop, and one of them said, "I'm sure she's here. I can feel it." She didn't go far. John realized that she was in danger. She hadn't just run away, she was a fugitive being hunted. At that moment, he made a firm decision. Come what may, he would not give her up. He didn't know why, but he felt he had to protect her. The night on Dawson's farm was the first of many filled with anxiety. The shadows that flickered in the distance were not just random travelers. They were two men. One, tall and strong, with a face carved from stone and cold gray eyes, named Jim. The other, thin and sneaky, with a cunning look, named Slick. They were bounty hunters, notorious in these parts. They stopped at the edge of the farm, their figures silhouetted against the starry sky, like two predators. John heard their quiet, but confident conversation. "She couldn't have gone far. Wounded," Jim hissed. "And whoever is hiding her here will pay for it." There was no threat in his words, only cold calculation. John gripped his rifle. He was ready to defend himself. When the bounty hunters rode on, he felt the tension slowly recede, but in its place came a deep, bone-chilling intrigue. What had this fragile girl done to be hunted by such ruthless men? Why were they so sure she was here? In the morning, he tried to talk to Sao. She looked better, but her eyes were still filled with fear. When John tried to ask her about her pursuers, she just shook her head, her face impassive. He realized that she didn't trust him, and that was natural. He was a white man, and they, the Apaches, were not used to mercy from his people. "They'll come again," John said, looking at her. "I don't know who they are, but they're looking for you." Sao flinched. She looked away, and then John noticed something that made him freeze. On her arm, just above the coat, there was a barely noticeable pattern embroidered with blue thread, a symbol he had seen on an old map that once belonged to his father. It was the mark of the Chiricahua tribe, famous for their warlike nature. Sao, as if reading his mind, suddenly spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but full of determination. "Not me, it's not my fault. My father," she didn't finish, but John already guessed. He knew that in the history of the Wild West, the Apaches were the last to surrender, and their leaders, such as Geronimo, were legends. But what could her father have done? John decided that they needed to leave the farm. He knew that he couldn't stand against Jim and Slick alone. He offered Sao to ride together, promising to take her to the nearest fort where she could find protection. But she flatly refused. "They'll find me there faster than anywhere else," she said. "I have to go alone. I don't want because of me." At that moment, John realized that he had to reveal the secret to help her. He couldn't leave her alone. He told her about his father, who was a cartographer and had connections with some Native American tribes. Dawson's father, Henry, was one of the few white men who believed in peaceful coexistence, and he passed that belief on to his son. He showed her the old map. It showed a secret path that led to a mountain sanctuary, inaccessible to pursuers. Sao looked at the map with surprise, then with hope. They decided to set off. They were going at night. John loaded all the necessary supplies into the wagon and hid Sao in bags of hay. At dawn, they set off. The journey was long and dangerous. On the second day, they saw that they were being pursued. Jim and Slick were on their hot trail. Suddenly, when they were almost at their destination, an obstacle appeared in their way, a landslide. Huge stones blocked the passage, and it was impossible to go around them. At that moment, at the most inopportune moment, when their pursuers were already close, Sao suddenly, as if by fate, jumped out of the wagon and stood right in front of the pursuers. John Dawson, frozen for a moment, felt shock. "Stop," she cried. "I'm here. Leave him alone. He has nothing to do with this." Jim and Slick, obviously surprised by her action, stopped. We're looking for you," Jim said, his eyes flashing with anger. My father is innocent," Sao cried. "He wasn't hiding him." John Dawson heard this, and a new guess pierced his heart. He knew that her father, the chief, could have been accused of something he hadn't done. He realized that this was all just a diversion. They were not looking for Sao, but for the one she was hiding. "Who?" John whispered, but Sao could no longer hear. "Innocent," she repeated, and suddenly her gaze fell on an old, battered box that lay on the ground, having fallen out of the wagon from the jolting. "Where is it?" Slick growled, looking at the box. "Where is it?" "You know what I'm talking about." "What are they talking about?" John asked again, approaching her. She looked at him, and her eyes held pain. "I can't say, it's too dangerous," but John didn't give up. "Tell me. I have to know." She looked at him, and there was nothing in her eyes but fear. She knew that if she spoke, she would put his life in danger, but she couldn't remain silent. "They're looking for the child," she whispered. John Dawson couldn't believe his ears. He felt his heart clench in his chest. He looked at her stomach, and then he saw a small, protruding belly. He looked at her eyes. They held despair. He looked at her arm. She was wearing a bracelet. He realized that all this time, She was protecting not herself, but an unborn child. And not just that, she said the child, not my child. So it wasn't her child. And then Jim Man Slick realized that she was trying to confuse them. Jim pulled out his revolver. Stop lying. We know you're hiding him. I know you know where he is, and we'll find him. Now come to us, and you'll avoid death, Jim said, pointing his revolver at her. John stood between them. He would not let them harm her. At that moment, an old Indian, who was following Seo's trail, came out from behind the trees. He was old, but strong. He looked at Jin Man Slick and said, "Leave her alone. She is innocent." Jin Man Slick laughed. "Do you think you can stop us, old man?" "I'm not alone," said the old man. From behind the trees came two more Indians. They were armed with bows and arrows. They were ready for a fight. "What's happening?" John whispered. "They her family," Seo whispered. Jin Man Slick, realizing that they were outnumbered, slowly retreated. They didn't want a fight. Their goal was not Seo, but something else. After they left, Seo was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. John, seeing this, realized that she had been on the verge. He walked up to her and hugged her. She was safe. "Thank you," she said, looking at him. "Thank you for not abandoning me." "I couldn't," John said. And at that moment, the old Indian, who was her father, walked up to John and said, "Thank you, white man. You saved my daughter." And he paused, looked at Seo, and then at John, and said, "And our son." John, stunned, looked at Seo. She nodded, and at that moment, John realized that Seo was not hiding her own child, but the child of her brother, who had died. He was the last of their kind, and his child was the last hope for salvation, and he knew that he could not abandon her. "What happened?" John asked. Our brother, he was killed because of." Seo couldn't finish. "Because of what?" John asked. "Because of it," said the old man, pointing to the box. John took the box and opened it. Inside was something that made him freeze. It wasn't a child. It was at this moment, John Dawson felt shock. He saw that the box did not contain a child, but John Dawson, holding the old wooden box in his hands, froze. The tension hanging in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jin Man Slick, standing at a distance, didn't move. Their eyes held a mixture of greed and malice. They knew that the box was not just an old trinket, and now, when John Dawson opened it, he experienced the true shock. Inside there was no gold, no jewels. On the velvet lining lay a small, skillfully carved bone amulet, resembling a bird, and several yellowed scrolls, covered with ancient, incomprehensible symbols. But that was not the main thing. At the bottom of the box, under the scrolls, lay a small, shriveled object, resembling a dried fruit, curled up in a ball. When John looked closer, he realized that it was a shriveled body. But it wasn't just a body. It was a small, desiccated person, like a mummy. John felt a chill run down his spine. "What is this?" John whispered, his voice trembling. Seo, seeing his reaction, came closer and knelt down. Her father, the old chief, named Black Eagle, came to her. He put his hand on her shoulder. "This is the soul of our people," he said. His voice was deep, like an echo in a canyon. "This is the mummy of our great chief. He is more than 500 years old. He is our history, our strength, our connection to our ancestors." John looked up at Black Eagle. "But why do they want this?" "They believe in a legend," Seo replied. "The legend says that whoever possesses him will gain the strength of his spirit and will be able to lead our people to new lands." "That's a lie," Jin shouted. "It's a legend about treasure, about gold. Inside this desiccated body are hidden countless riches that he collected during his life." John looked at the mummy, and he realized that he believed Black Eagle. He saw how Black Eagle and Seo treated it with such reverence, with such love, that there could be no talk of treasures. "They want to steal our history," said Black Eagle. "And now that we have found it, they will stop at nothing to take it from us." And then John Dawson felt that he was also a part of this story. He hadn't just found a girl in his barn. He had found something more. He had found a meaning that was lost in his lonely life. "We need to move," he said. "We need to get out of here." Jin Man Slick, seeing that they couldn't just take the box, decided to act. They took out their rifles and fired into the air. It was a signal. Soon, other bounty hunters they had hired began to gather from all sides. They surrounded Dawson's wagon. There were many of them, and they were armed. "Give us the box, and you'll stay alive," Jin shouted. John stood in front of the wagon, protecting Seo and Black Eagle. "I won't give it up," he said, His voice was firm. Sao, seeing his determination, stood next to him. "And I won't give it up," she said. Black Eagle and the other Indians also stood next to them. This was their common battle, a battle for history, for faith, for the future. And then John, looking at Jim, noticed a ring with an unusual sign on his hand. It was a sign that was drawn on one of his father's maps, the sign of the Dark Hunters, a group of adventurers who were engaged in plundering ancient Indian burial grounds in search of treasures. Now he understood why Jim was so sure that there was gold in the mummy. This was their goal. John, suddenly, took an old compass that his father had given him from his pocket. He knew that this compass was supposed to point north, but now it was spinning, as if it were broken. Black Eagle, seeing the compass, frowned. "This is not a compass," he said. It is a map." John, surprised, looked at the compass. A small, rolled-up map was hidden in its case. He unrolled it. It was a map on which a diagram of ancient caves was drawn. And then John understood. His father hadn't just drawn a map. He had hidden the key to salvation in it. It was the way to a sacred place where the mummy could be hidden from enemies. "We have to go," John said. And they ran. They carried the box, and the bounty hunters shot at them. John, Sao, and Black Eagle ran until they reached the entrance to the cave, which was blocked by stones. "We need to move these stones," John said. Sao and Black Eagle began to move the stones. John protected them by shooting at the hunters. Finally, they were able to clear the passage. They entered the cave, and John, Sao, and Black Eagle, breathing heavily, felt relief. They were safe. They had saved the mummy, saved history, saved the future. They were on the verge, but they endured. And they realized that they were together, that they were united not only by this battle, but by something more. They were a family. "Now we're safe," John said, looking at Sao. "Now we can think about the future." And then Sao took his hand. "John," she said, I'm pregnant." John, stunned, looked at her. He didn't know what to say. He knew that her husband had died, but this was unexpected. "But you said the child, it's my brother's child," she said. "But it's true." And then John understood. He was amazed by her courage, her strength of spirit, and he realized that now he had to take care of them. He couldn't abandon them. He was their last hope. He was their family. "Now we have a future," he said. His voice was full of hope. "Now we have a family." But they didn't know that at that moment, another man entered the cave through another entrance, the one they thought was dead. "John," he whispered. His voice was weak, but he was alive. John, the voice that sounded in the cave was weak, but clear. John, Sao, and Black Eagle turned. From the darkness, staggering, an Indian they had thought was dead emerged. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes burned with determination. "Eden," Sao whispered, her eyes filled with tears. This was her brother, Sao's husband, whom she had thought was dead. They thought they killed me," he said, falling to the ground. "But I survived." John Dawson, without hesitation, rushed to him. He was wounded, and his wound was deep. John quickly put a tourniquet on him with his shirt. He knew that Eden needed help, and he knew that he had to help him. "I knew you could protect her," Eden whispered, looking at Sao. "I knew you would find each other." At that moment, John Dawson felt that everything was falling into place. He realized that Sao was not just hiding a mummy, but her brother, whom they had thought was dead. Eden, in turn, was hiding the mummy that his ancestors had entrusted to him. They were both trying to save something important, something that was more precious than their own lives. The bounty hunters, hearing voices, also entered the cave. They saw John, Sao, Black Eagle, Eden, and the box. Jim, seeing Eden, froze. He didn't expect him to be alive. "He's alive," Jim growled. "That's impossible." "Anything is possible," John said, standing in front of Eden. "Now you won't get the mummy, or the gold, or anything else. You'll leave here and never come back." Jim, seeing that John and the Indians were ready to fight, realized that he had lost. He and his men slowly retreated. They were defeated. They were defeated not by strength, but by determination. They were defeated by faith. When the bounty hunters left, silence reigned in the cave. Sao, Black Eagle, Eden, and John sat, huddled together. They were safe. They were together. They were a family. John Dawson, sitting next to them, felt relief. He hadn't just saved someone's life. He had found meaning. His life, which had been so lonely and empty, was suddenly filled with meaning. he had found a family he never thought he would find. He realized that family is not just blood. Family is people who are willing to protect each other, no matter what. Mini conclusion with a lesson. The story of John Dawson and Sayo is not just a tale of the Wild West, where hostility between tribes and white people was a common occurrence. It is a story about how even in the most difficult and hopeless situations, kindness and compassion can become the driving force. For our grandparents, who went through hard times, this story can serve as a reminder that family is the greatest value. It teaches that no matter who you are or where you come from, what matters is what you are willing to do for those you love. In the modern world, where people often forget their roots, where material values are placed above human relationships, this story can serve as a lesson. It shows that compassion, kindness, and a willingness to help can change the world. It is a reminder that family is not only those who are related to you by blood, but also those who are willing to go with you to the end, no matter what. The end.